Welcome to the Camera Shake podcast, episode 42. And today we have something really special. If you cast your mind back, and that's for all of you who have been listening to all of our episodes, of course. But if you cast your mind back a couple of episodes, we had none other than Ivan Weiss on the show, and we challenged him to a selfie shootout. So today, in today's episode, we're going to have a look at all the results. And we're going to be talking to Ivan again. Of course, he's our special guest for the second time. The first guest, by the way, Ivan, who's appeared on the show twice. Well, hey.
Oh, I'm going for the hat trick now. I'm going for the
hat trick. Yes, absolutely. Cool. So just to kind of put that into context. So when you were on the show, Ivan, we sort of casually mentioned that we should really do a little challenge. And we decided to do a selfie challenge.
Yeah. I mean, right now here in the UK, because we're all in lockdown, I mean, self-portraits are all I can shoot. So it was a good little stimulus to get the camera out, get the lights out, and do something creative rather than sitting around, worrying about stuff. So yeah, it was a good idea. Glad we did it.
And of course, little did we know at the time that this lockdown would be as drastic as it has turned out to be, because we're literally back in like full lockdown at the moment. So, even going out, for extensive walks or something isn't really happening at the moment.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah. And, you can only shoot your pet so many times.
I don't even have any. I've got a fox that lives in the garden, but
wildlife photography is going to be the next challenge.
I'm always wary saying the word shoot when it relates to photographing animals.
Yes, yeah. It's a photographer's audience here, so I think everyone takes it the way it's intended. Yeah, for sure.
Cool. So we created a selfie image each, and we're going to talk about those in a second. But before we get into that, how have the last few weeks been for you, Ivan?
I mean, in terms of work and the industry, I think everything is still very much on hold. All the conversations that I'm having with people here are just about people being hopeful that soon we'll be able to get back to work and finding things to do in the meantime. One thing that's a recurring theme is just that idea of, while we're not working for money, we're working to create value. And I think this podcast and particularly the selfie challenge is part of that. We're still creating things. It's what we do. And hopefully that will stand us in good stead for when we come out of lockdown and we can start getting back to proper work again.
Yeah, it's one of these things, I think, for any creative person. It's just, it's the sort of need to make things, that urge to make things. It's really difficult when you're kind of locked up at home, and you can't do the things that you would normally do. It's really important to find other outlets. Yeah. And, we've spoken about this before, where in the first lockdown in the UK, Nick and me set up like a Zoom group, like a weekly Zoom call, like a group for people to come together, and we could discuss little creative ideas, that we could do around the house, or that people could do in the garden, or just, and of course back then in the summer, it was all good because you could go out, you could hang out in the garden, you could shoot like, I don't know, flowers and whatever it was. But this time it feels harsher. It kind of feels, it's winter and it's dark and it's, you're literally locked in the house. And
yeah. That's it. I mean, you going out for a walk in the summer is nice. When you go out for a walk in the winter, it's just because you want to get to the pub to sit down and have some food in the warm at the end of the walk, and you can't do that. So it's not quite the same. But I mean, I think really as artists, we are actually quite fortunate because we recognize that we have the need to create things. I don't think that's particular to artists. I think that's just a human instinct. The difference is that we know it and we do something about it. So I think a lot of people who don't normally do anything that they consider to be a creative activity or hobby, because of the way life is different during lockdown, they're feeling the same frustrations, but they perhaps don't know what to do about it, because normally their creativity would be used in, problem solving during their everyday life. And there's, there are fewer things going on in general. So that itch isn't being scratched for everyone. So I think we'll probably see a lot of people taking up new hobbies. Quite possibly right now, there are some people listening to the podcast who are new to photography. So it's a good thing.
Absolutely, and this is another reason why I really love this episode so much, because of course we're going to be talking about our efforts, and we're going to get some feedback on our photographs, but we're also going to be talking about how we made those photographs and the thinking and some of the technical aspects that went into making those. And I'm just going to say this right at the beginning here. This is sort of like an episode that's kind of split in two, because we've got if you're listening to the audio version right now, we're going to be talking about the images and how we made them. But the YouTube version of this episode is going to have some behind the scenes editing videos that will be part of that episode. Now, that's very difficult to kind of convey in audio only, but if you're interested to see how Ivan, Nick, and myself actually edited our photos, then I highly recommend for you to head over to YouTube on youtube.com/camerashake and check out this episode 42, and you'll be able to not only see our beautiful faces, but you'll also be able to watch us actually edit our shots. So if that's something you're into, I highly recommend you check out the YouTube version of this. But without further ado, let's talk about our photographs. So Ivan, when we first came up with the idea of doing a selfie challenge, what went through your mind there?
Well, I mean, to be honest, the first thing that I was thinking was, because it's Camera Shake podcast, I had in mind an idea of trying to shoot something that incorporated the idea of camera shake. And as is my normal sort of creative process, I just do a lot of kind of unstructured thinking and just let the idea kind of roll around in my mind for a few days. And then I realized that I would need some way to shake the camera, because if it's a self-portrait, it's a bit difficult to do. So I started thinking, is there some way I could like sit it on top of the washing machine or something of that nature. But yeah, that turned out to be a non-starter when I started getting more into the technicals. So yeah, when I sort of turned away from that idea, I just thought, well, actually, let me just shoot something that's, in the style of what I would normally shoot for a client, but with myself as the subject. So I went from there, and having all the time in the world and not needing to worry about keeping my subject from getting bored or having to engage the subject, I ended up just getting all of my lights out and setting up a ridiculously complicated light setup. And I had a great deal of fun playing with adjusting each of the lights to get very specific with which bits of the image are lit and how they're lit and from what direction, and hard light and soft light and all of that stuff. So yeah, it was great in the end. I think, like I said on the first podcast, sitting there thinking about it, it felt like, oh, this is a big thing. But once I got going, oh yeah, it was fun. I spent several hours, and it was satisfying to create something.
Nick, how about you? What went through your mind when we first sort of came up with this challenge?
Fear. No, I thought, well, obviously I know Ivan's work and the type of portraits and that he does, and they're just, if you haven't seen his work before, just go and pause this, go look now, and it's just awesome. I thought there's no way I'm going to be able to produce something anywhere close to what Ivan does. But for topic, like Ivan, a couple of things went through my head. I thought, do I perhaps try and go for something similar to what I suspect Ivan might produce, so that we're kind of on the same wavelength? I thought, no, that's silly. Do what I do and do it as well as I can, and it's so that's why I settled on. I had a theme in my head of, and for the life, annoyingly, I can't remember what it was I was watching. But I was watching some TV drama, and I thought, that could be interesting. And how about I come up with something that's a little bit like what might be a TV advert of a really moody character. And I thought, yeah, that kind of sits quite well with my personality. So that's the route that I went. I kept things simple, quite deliberately, because space was a bit of an issue too. Yeah, there we go. That was my general thought process to begin with, without going into great details about the setup yet. Anyway, how about you, Kay?
I mean, I think I had similar thoughts. At first I thought like, okay, a photo challenge with Ivan in the game, that's hard. And then of course the next thing you think like, okay, I've got to produce something that's sort of in Ivan's style. And so I had some ideas of like, totally recreating one of his sort of self-portraits that he's got on his website and just putting my face in it. So, but then I sort of thought, no, that's, it's just like you, Nick. I kind of thought, well, actually, I've just got to do what I do. And so it sort of means that you end up playing to your strengths, of course, What was different this time was that I thought I had an idea, well, probably about a year ago or something, when I started a photo series called 3 Heads in a Row, which is really shot in the style of what I produced for this challenge. And so the idea was there to sit across the table from another person, and have a chat for a couple of hours and just shoot, and then create literally a triptych of portraits that go on Instagram, because you've got 3 images per row. That's why it's called 3 Heads in a Row. And to really kind of bring out sort of almost like a comedic side to it. And I started that in 2019. And then of course COVID totally disrupted that endeavor. And I realized a little while ago that I hadn't shot, like the last person I shot for this particular photo project was my mom, and that was Christmas 2019. And so I realized that I hadn't shot anything for this in a whole year. And I kind of thought, you know what, this is actually just an opportunity to really kind of get back into things. And at the same time, I bought some new modifiers and stuff. And I kind of thought, you know what, if I can use this as a challenge to sort of to simplify the process for myself at the same time, but produce sort of the same result, then I'm kind of killing 2 birds with one stone, as it were. So that was the thing. And it, the idea of doing sort of an action shot, that was the next part of the concept. But it was super fun. I got my almost my whole family involved in the actual shoot. So it was a bit of it was a fun little exercise. So I actually had a lot of fun doing it in the end. Yeah.
Good stuff.
So, excellent. All right. So at this point, I think we're going to dive right into it. So what we'll do is let's start with Ivan's shot. Is that cool with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. And then what we'll do is we'll just throw the shot up on the screen right now, and we'll just let you talk about your photograph.
So shooting a self-portrait, one of the things that's often a challenge, there are a number of technical challenges. One, obviously, is how do you get focus? And that, luckily, that challenge is answered for us nowadays by cameras that can detect the eye and automatically focus on it. So I shot this at f1.2 because I didn't have to worry about missing focus. The camera did all that hard work for me. I knew I'd be wearing a hat because I haven't had a haircut for like 2 months. And it just simplifies things in a lot of ways. And I've just got this one hat that I kind of like. So that set it happens to match the colors that I generally like to work with anyway, sort of deep greens and sort of, thick, heavy textures, a woolly hat. So I pulled on a coat that sort of matches, or doesn't match exactly, but it kind of goes with it. And then I put the camera up and a bunch of lights and used a wired remote. And I just sort of sat there tapping away, or stood there rather, tapping away with my thumb on the shutter release, and just kind of let my mind wander and not worry about the camera being there, so that I can't remember exactly what I was thinking about in this particular shot, but I was allowing it to be a genuine expression. I got some with a lighter expression as well, of course, but I felt this was more appropriate for the times, and I guess more in keeping with the work that I generally do. So the lighting on this was, I guess you could say, very technical, but on the other hand, really quite simple in terms of how it's all managed. I often say to people as well, if you can work out how to use a second light, then you can work out how to use a third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, whatever, because it's the principle is the same once you're using more than one light source. So the number of lights that you use, I don't think it makes it any more difficult. The challenge, of course, is that being the subject as well as the photographer, it's difficult to see the results. So there's a bit more trial and error in terms of getting the placement of the lights just where you want them. But this is essentially a development of a lighting setup that I use fairly often with clients. So the basics are very familiar to me, and I was able to get the basics set up straight away. And then using other lights, I just enhanced and fine-tuned things to where I wanted them. And then I went through a fairly standard for me post-production workflow. So I did a bit of skin retouching. It was a challenge there to really, not let vanity get in the way and not overdo it on the retouch of my own face. But at the same time, to create something that still looked, visually appealing. And then color grading, very much in keeping with the color palette that I like to use for a lot of my work, which is quite appropriate for the wardrobe that I've got and just the overall mood of the picture, I suppose.
Did you have some immediate feedback? Like, did you shoot tethered so you could see the shots as they pop up?
Yeah, so I always shoot tethered because I like to have that immediate feedback. The difficulty when you are the subject and you're using constant light is that you turn around and look at the computer screen and you can't see anything for a few minutes because the lights that I'm shooting with are so bright that you're unable to adjust to the contrast particularly quickly. So it was much more like shoot 20 or 30 frames and then go over and have a little rest of the eyes and then review and then step back in. And of course that presents the challenge of how do you make sure you get back to exactly the same spot. So I was using seeing the tethered shots come up on the monitor mostly just to work out if I was in the middle of the frame, because I could make that out. I could work out if the blob in the middle was in the right place, and then looking for detail later on. I think I shot 200 frames in total. I tried a couple of different sort of variations on the pose. I tried a few without the coat, some looking to camera, some looking away, all of those kind of variations. And this was the one that stood out for me.
It is one of the best portraits I've seen for a while. It is superb, Ivan. It is absolutely superb. And, there's something about your style that, and I appreciate it was shot at 1.2 as well. And that obviously has a big part to play, but your portraits pop in a way that not very few do. And it's very difficult to describe what I mean by that. And it's not like because they're also subtle all at the same time as well. I don't know how you achieve that. It's incredible. You just have this style of photo, and then with the editing on top, that's just, it makes you, I haven't stopped looking at it since we've been talking about it.
Are you going to stalk me now?
Oh, I'm outside your door at the minute. Did you not? Oh,
Yeah, I mean, so this is one of the traps that photographers fall into a lot. Myself included. It's very easy. When we talk amongst ourselves, we always talk about the technical because that's the stuff that only we understand. That's the stuff where our friends who are not photographers yawn and roll their eyeballs if we start talking about technical. So amongst ourselves, we can indulge that. But we forget very often to step back and experience the picture as a non-photographer, as a regular human being. The fact of the matter is we do experience things as regular human beings because you cannot get rid of the fact that you are a human first and foremost and a photographer second. It's just that we never talk about the human experience of it because, I don't know, we don't. I think possibly one of the secrets, if you want to call it that, is making sure that emotional response to the picture is the fundamental thing that decides whether a picture is going to be successful or not. And then everything else, all of the technicals have to complement or at the very least not detract from that. So, if you've got a perfectly technically executed shot and the sort of shot that everybody could see is technically difficult, yeah, people will say, oh, wow, that was difficult. But they're not going to keep looking at it because they don't have the emotional response. So I think that's possibly where the secret is. That I do like to prioritize the emotional first and foremost.
Absolutely. And as long as that's there, if the technique isn't quite there or the shot wasn't quite nailed, whatever, because the most important aspect is there and it still makes it a great shot. But all that being said, you nailed both.
Well, I like to get the technicals right as well so that I can talk to photographers about it without getting ripped to shreds. So, yeah.
I tell you what's really interesting, or what really struck me about your self-portrait is the fact that really everything in it ties in. It all ties together. Everything from the wardrobe, the color palette, the background, the way the background is lit, and the way that everything focuses on the brightest spot in the image, which is your face, and then that's where the emotion sits. It's just in your expression. So you've got everything from the colors, the exposure, down to the expression. It just all ties in. It's one of these things where people very often, or photographers very often, say like, oh, you got to look at the lens, the eyes have to be on the lens, blah blah. And that's true so often, but this is a really good example for, a portrait where if your gaze wasn't out of the photo or out of the frame, it really wouldn't work in the same way that it does. And this is really just, it's another thing that really strikes me in this is it's not, it really, it has that emotional kind of, value to it, if you know what I mean. Sure. And it just really all just filters down to your face, and it's everything that everything plays a role in it. Like I said, the exposure, the way the lighting is set, and the colors as well. I mean, the colors are just absolutely gorgeous. It's just that it really conjures up a lot of things as well. I think when you see these colors, like for me, I grew up in a family like my granddad was a forest ranger. I grew up around these colors. I remember like my granddad was a forest ranger. So my granddad, going out in the forest, like on hunts or whatever else, wearing those kind of colors. So this all just really takes me back. So all of that, looking at that picture, all of that comes back. It all just gets wrapped into the whole thing, just all of these memories and everything else. And I think that's a really important thing. Very often when you look at a photograph, it's not just what you see, it's also what you see actually brings up inside of you.
For sure. So, I mean, in color theory, I know there are lots of resources available for photographers, in particular for people that are creating, video, movies, etc., on color theory. And one of the bases of that is what colors signify to us, and they're fairly universal things across cultures. Green has certain connotations across most cultures. For some people, it's really important to approach it from that point of view. I don't really like to go into it that way. It's more just, I like this color, and then I'll try and work out why, rather than I want this effect, so I'm going to choose this color. So it's maybe a slightly backward process for me, but I think, because I'm not shooting to a brief for a creative director. Yeah. I'm just satisfying my own taste, so that's the way it comes out. But I like that juxtaposition often of colors that are sort of warm and comforting, but an expression that is a little bit the opposite, maybe a little bit disquieting, a little bit inviting some more thought before you respond.
Yeah, the one thing that really sums this up for me is I'm dying to know what you're thinking about when I look at this photo.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that for me says, and I'm still wondering now. that says a lot to me, that I really want to know what's going on in that picture. I tell you, the other thing that really fascinates me about this picture is texture. There's so many things to look at in this. Like, it's your beard, of course, on one hand, but it's also like the texture of the coat, for example, or the cap. And then the juxtaposition there is with that super smooth, shallow depth of field background. So you've got that super smoothness there. And then you've got all that really like rich texture of the coat, and then of course the texture of the beard. It's just, it really sits really well on top of each other. And it's just, again, it just draws you into the picture. It makes it look really lifelike.
Yeah.
In a weird way,
So. I mean, when I set up for the shot in the first place, I intended to shoot at f8 to hold focus through, not fully through the whole frame, but certainly to have less of the fall off of focus that we've got here. But it didn't work as well because it was just too busy. And I mean, it's not exactly simple in terms of all of the lines and the textures that are going on, but using the shallow depth of field just allows all of those things to kind of meld into each other, but just appear enough that they're interesting as well, I think. I mean, that's my interpretation of it.
Again, there are a lot of things that really that make this portrait really quite special. The other thing that I noticed when I looked at this also is this sort of headroom that you leave over the head, because you're placing your eye line relatively low in the frame. And so you're probably, you're leaving more headroom above the top of the head than you would ordinarily see in a portrait. And I think that's a really interesting kind of aspect of it. It almost gives it almost like a classic feel. It's it has this and it's. I always find that, because this is always a thought that's in the back of my mind. It's like, okay, where are my eyes? Where's my eye line? Like, where, and I always have to force myself to do things differently from the norm, because for some reason my eye is always drawn to like this sort of kind of almost like the standard way of composing things, and then I always look at that and I always start thinking, okay, how can I make this stand out by just changing the norm a little bit? If that makes sense. So, when I look at a lot of your imagery on your website, I notice that it's like, okay, here we've got a lot more headroom, and it just adds to the overall expression of the photograph.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are sort of standard rules, if you like, or your pieces of advice for framing in photography that make sense in certain contexts and not in others. So, fill the frame, right? We've all been told, if you've had any sort of photography coaching at any point, fill the frame, because you want to not waste your resolution by cropping in later to get the thing that you want to the aspect ratio and the size that you want. But that sort of implies that you have to fill the frame with the face. And in this shot, for example, it's not uncommon, it's not unusual for my work. There's a natural vignette in the background. And to me, that is part of the shot, because that gradient from the top down towards the middle is part of what's directing your eye into the face. The bottom half of the frame has got all of this, these textures and the lines of the coat and the shadows from the collar and all of that stuff going on. And then the beard makes a natural sort of separation between those things. If I didn't have that room at the top, I would feel that the shot was imbalanced. So the background is part of the subject in that sense for me, which then kind of dictates that the eyes are going to be somewhere near the actual the middle, really, the center point of the frame.
I think the other thing that struck me, actually, just because I've seen the straight out of camera shot, and then compared it to the final edit, and I have to say I was really struck by how close the straight out of camera version was to the edit in the end. I mean, that was like, because it really, it's not a heavy edit on this. This is pretty close to what it actually looked like coming straight out of camera. That
shot out of camera could have been published as it was. It's that good, and what you've obviously done is then put your taste on top of that, and to make it look how you actually want this shot to look. But if anybody else had taken that shot, they could easily have published it and gone, wow.
Yeah. I think that's because I'm a studio photographer, I have the luxury of being able to get, I don't want to use the word perfection, but you know what I mean, like get it right in camera. So then for me, the post-production is about enhancing what's been captured. I won't say there's never been times where I've had to rely on post-production to correct something I got wrong. But I don't enjoy that kind of post-production. That's like, oh crap. I mean, a couple of years ago, I did a shoot for a magazine cover, and I just hadn't left enough width in the frame. And so I ended up having to recreate the background by hand in Affinity Photo, and it was shot inside a room with a mantelpiece and bookshelves and things, and I actually had to like draw them in and make them look realistic, cloning across and all the rest of it. And I just thought, I'm not doing that again. That sort of work in post-production is not the stuff that interests me. I much prefer to use post-production as a means to enhance and amplify the image, but it has to be, for my workflow, it has to be usable straight out of camera in the first place. I don't want to be going in and having to correct stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty much the opposite end of what I shoot very often, is where I shoot with intent, because I tend to make composites, or I shoot a lot of composites, and so you shoot with intent, and that you won't have to worry about the light stand in the background or this and that, the other, because you're never going to use that part of the image anyway. So it's like, you're focusing, or I always focus on the actual subject that I'm shooting, because I know I can frame things, in post. Yeah. It's just going to end up looking very different from what you'll see in the camera.
Sure. Yeah, I mean that approach, obviously, that's another approach to creativity that gives you a whole load more flexibility. I don't really like doing the composite thing, because I always find, am I trying to make this look realistic, or am I trying to make it look good? And if I'm starting from the point of, I know it's not realistic, I can never see it as being real, because I know that it's a composite. I just don't have that that skill of being able to do that. So I've always kind of avoided it. I mean, taking a light stand out of the frame, that kind of thing I will do, obviously, but shooting with the intention of getting 2 or 3 frames and bringing them together is that's a level of technical creativity that I don't have.
I always think like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if, and then, you know, that's a rabbit hole you can, it's difficult to get out of.
Of course, yeah. So. All of a sudden, your self-portrait in lockdown is shot on a tropical island somewhere. You've got palm trees in the background.
Yeah, exactly.
Were you responsible for all those Bernie Sanders memes that I saw going around?
I was responsible for some. That I will admit, especially Star Wars related ones. Yep,
good stuff.
Right, so Nick, how did your shoot go? Why don't you tell us a little bit about your photograph?
So, as I was saying, the idea I ended up settling on was that moody kind of, you know, maybe bad cop kind of TV show sort of advert that you might see, poster that you might see, was kind of the general gist behind my what I wanted to do. And I wanted to also incorporate to kind of enhance that a bit more, kind of the gritty look of kind of that background that you're seeing there and so on, versus that cleaner look of the suit. And so you kind of got the kind of the 2 ends of the spectrum, if you like. Then from a technical perspective, this is actually just a 1 light setup. Off over to my right hand side, obviously, and that was just done. That was a speed light with a softbox on. It's quite a large one. It's about a meter in diameter. That softbox. And I left it at that, and I deliberately left it like that to keep it as dark as possible. That backfired slightly in reality, because it was slightly underexposed when I went into editing. Fine, no big deal. But I wanted to then enhance some of the other aspects that were in the shot. So I ended up doing some editing on that with some radial filters and whatnot, just to enhance some of those bits and pieces. Then a bit much like Ivan was describing regarding the headroom, I had exactly the same thought process, and so I chose a texture which had kind of gradient down, kind of going vertically down into the image. That I laid on top, which kind of leads the eye down to me where most of that light is on my face. So that was the idea behind having that kind of headroom, and I thought the texture on the background was actually quite important to sell the idea of it being quite a gritty kind of image. And that was really it from a shot perspective, So I probably took maybe 100 frames in the end of this, and this was the one I kind of settled on. I had lots of different various ways I sat, much like yourself, Ivan. Jacket done up, jacket off, jacket undone, sat forward, sat back, and actually, there's probably one more thing I should probably say. Actually, this is the second shoot for this. The first one I did, I didn't notice at the time because I wasn't wearing my glasses, so the sharpness wasn't quite there. I'd actually missed focus a little bit throughout. And so, this is a real world situation here. Absolutely missed it. And it was afterwards, and I just packed some of it down, and I was so annoyed with myself that I said, this isn't happening. So I waited a couple of days and I reshot it with a slightly different setup. And I think I actually prefer my original shot that I would have settled on as well. But there you go. You live and learn. So then just from an editing perspective, nothing really outrageous going on. Like I said, some radial filters to enhance the bits and pieces, usual kind of dodging and burning and so forth. I had to light up the left-hand side of my face a little bit more. It was just a bit too dark for my liking. There's obviously textures, a couple of different textures going on throughout, which I've taken off myself, but left everywhere else and reduced it on some of the other items that are there. There is a natural vignette going on with the way I shot it. However, there's also sort of gradient filters going on, reducing the exposure on all the sides. There was one other interesting thing that ended up happening, was that lampshade that you're seeing there. You know what lampshades can be like. They're on the piss every so often, right? They're never quite straight. I had straightened it before shooting. However, as the shoot progressed, it kind of went back to how it was. So what I've ended up doing is I chopped that out. I skewed it, straightened it up a little bit more, made it ever so slightly larger too, and then put it back on top. It had to be done. It was just annoying me. I've got a little bit of a thing for straight lines and things being organized. So that I had to take care of that. There we go. That's the most of it. Obviously you'll see more in the edit video.
Good stuff.
Cool. Yeah, it does really have that like a TV detective show thumbnail on Netflix type of a look.
Yeah,
I think it could really work well for that. Again, I like your expression as well on it. It's quite moody.
Yeah, I'm quite good at moody faces.
It's all in the eyebrow. Is that crease above the camera right eyebrow?
Yeah, exactly.
That sells it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
There was a very similar shot where I wasn't doing that, and it just didn't work quite as well. Yeah,
I like to think of that as it reminds me of Jack D. You know?
Oh, one of my favorite comedians.
Yeah, he's not a happy chap, is he?
He's not.
But yeah, that's the kind of brow action that he often has. Which is cool, I think. It's interesting what you're saying about the straight lines. It's one of my obsessions as well, is geometry in a composition. And I think that's one of the things that appealed to me straight away with this. You've got those three obvious points: the plant pot, the lampshade, and the face, giving us a triangle there. And it's a nice juxtaposition, the expression on the face compared to the sort of serenity of a white lampshade, that's just nicely lit and just sitting there. Now we know it wasn't cooperating, but that's what you've presented in the final edit. I also like the way that you've kept the colors really simple. So the tie, the flower, and obviously the background are really the only things that appear as colors in the shot, and then the suit being blue, but it reads as being quite neutral. And skin, I think we generally don't experience skin as a color, we just read it as skin. So pretty much through the whole shot, the only thing going on is red, which I think helps to enhance the geometry of the shot. It could have been a lot busier and more distracting if you'd had less color uniformity through it, I think. So that's really helped to give it more impact.
And you also have this juxtaposition again there, between this really slick suit and then the kind of gritty texture on the background. Yeah. That really works. It works really well. I tell you what, there's a couple of things. So first of all, when I remember we had a conversation, and I remember when you told me that you'd bought a red background. I mean, you thought, really, red? Like red? Like what? And then when I saw this shot, I thought, yeah, man, this works really well. So that was really quite surprising. So yeah, I can't wait to try out that background for sure.
Yeah, it's not the color background that would work for everything by any stretch, but it just felt like the right thing for this what I wanted to present.
And I'll tell you the other thing I really like about this is just like little details. But if you look at the light, the light stand itself, you've got these cubes, and then there's just that touch of light to the left of that, and it just brings out the shape of that light stand. Yeah, it's just a little bit, but I love the way it kind of drops off into shadow on the other side, on the right hand side. On the left, you just have that little bit of light, and it just gives it that shape, and you kind of get an impression of of what that actually looks like. That's just, I love that, the way the light just kind of skims really the front of the plant pot and the front of that that little table and stuff. It's I like it. It's really
that was well, you'll see in the video that's all post, all of that. It needed to be with the way I'd lit myself. So just to go and take a step back for a second, just to maybe elaborate just slightly more, it's the reason I went with one light was because of the look. The look I wanted to get across was that real moody kind of style, right? And I didn't want any of those objects there to distract from what was the primary intention of having real contrast in the face. That kind of lit and very dark, kind of show two sides, bit two-faced almost to a certain extent. So very, very hard lines there. But then as the edit started to progress, it didn't work for me like as well as I wanted it to. It didn't quite. I didn't execute it as well as I hoped I was going to, and I was doing. And so just brightening those bits up, and it's only about a stop on all of them, give or take. It's not a lot. Some bits are a lot more, as you can imagine, but generally around a stop. And then lighting up my face, it just worked. It felt a bit more cohesive then, rather than a real so dramatic. So everything you're seeing there on the left that's lit up, it wasn't originally. If I were to do this again, I would light those very individually, and be a bit more controlled over that, I guess I'd say.
And I think there's always a danger there when you've got multiple objects in the frame that sort of pop out, because the eyes are always drawn to the brightest thing in the frame, and typically that would be the face. And here you've got at least two other objects, like the light shade and then the plant pot, that are also very bright. And so there's a danger there that the eye kind of gets confused because you don't know where to look first, in a sense. Having said that, though, I actually really quite like the fact that there's a little something else happening to the left of that image. So I don't really see that as a problem. But I think that's always something to really watch out for.
Absolutely. And I think part of that, why they're brighter than they are, is to almost insist that whoever's looking at this insist that they see that juxtaposition that we've been talking about between the moody and then these, like as Ivan described, kind of these more serene type objects, that they are looking at that too, to say, oh yeah, that is it's different. It's a bit contrasty. I think perhaps in hindsight, now I haven't seen this for a few days, I might bring some. I would possibly bring some of that down on the left in exposure, just a touch. Well, maybe not by a lot, but just a smidge.
I think it depends. What the intention is, because when you talked earlier about this, looking like it could be a thumbnail of a Netflix show or something, it does present the question of, okay, what's the story with this plant?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like he's looking at me because he's pissed off with the plant, or or
the light.
I think the plant is the star. More than the lampshades. Also, there's a little bit of a similarity in the shape of the plant with the crossed arm pose as well. Yeah. So there's a bit of an echo there compositionally, which again helps tie it together. And because the plant is surrounded by the shadow of being in the under the box bit of the table, it just pops that bit more. So it does. If I watched this show, I would be expecting to find out in the pilot episode, like, what's the story with this plant? What's going on there?
Yeah, absolutely. You would
curious.
You would assume some sort of significance of the plant and the light. There's got to be something. Is it? I don't know. Is the show about the plant?
I'm going to make this up off the top of my head now, but it's going to be a plant like Leon. and what he was like with that plant. That's what it's going to be like. There we go. There we are. I meant that all the time. Absolutely.
That's it. Perfect.
It was a homage to Luc Besson. Yeah. Okay, exactly. We got it. Exactly. Wrong color scheme.
Absolutely.
I wanted to actually comment on that as well, because I have a red canvas backdrop that I find, it's really difficult to get red as a background color to work for you. And when it does, you then have to be very sparing. Like you couldn't have more than one shot with this in your portfolio, I would say. I mean, you could, of course you could if you wanted to, but it would become a thing that you're the guy with the red backgrounds, It's very dominant. So you do have to approach it with a lot of skill. And I think here it works perfectly. So hats off. Well, I'm going to keep my hat on, but hats off for using a red canvas successfully, because it's not easy.
Yeah.
Awesome, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I was really surprised, when I first saw that shot. I'm like, oh, that does actually work.
Mr. Lutz.
With my self-portrait this time around, like I said earlier, it's really based on a photo series that I shot in 2019, or that I started shooting in 2019. I was really going to continue that through 2020, which then didn't work out for obvious reasons. Mainly because sitting 1.5 meters opposite another person was deemed to be too dangerous during 2020. So, that was just an issue. But what this really is it's sort of a look that I sort of, I don't know if I really created that look, or whether there's just a whole bunch of different influences that come together. But it's essentially sort of almost like a comical, kind of almost cartoonish type of portrait. And the original intention was to really get people to bring in their favorite objects, like objects that mean something to them, and then to basically talk to them, and throughout the conversation to photograph them handling this object. And so it'll be that that would give you sort of almost like a third dimension of understanding of what that person would be all about, because the objects that you choose in that situation do say a lot about you, if that makes sense. Yeah, so it could be an indication as to what you do, what the person in the photograph does for a job, for example, or what kind of interests they have, or just what's dear to them, and so on and so forth. So the idea was really to create a triptych of images that show people 3 different objects, and you would kind of learn a little bit about the person just by looking at the photographs and by looking at how they interact with that particular object. And at the same time, it was supposed to be kind of funny and a little bit entertaining and all the rest of it. So that was the idea. So the idea for this one was really mainly that I wanted to slice something in midair, and that in itself, presented itself with a number of different problems. Like one was depth of field, because I really needed to get the depth of field to the point where the tip of the knife was, more or less approximately as sharp as my face. And when the camera is literally like 1.5 meters in front of you, and you're shooting at about 32 mil, I realized that I had to go a lot further than I thought I would, and I've certainly never shot a portrait at f/18 before. That's, I can definitely say that. And of course, the amount of light you have to basically push into that, at that f-stop is quite phenomenal. So it was good fun. It's good fun working out how to create that look at such a different f-stop, and making that work. Because typically I shoot these at about 7.2, roughly. That would be typically where that's at. And there's a number of different components. Of course, you get the back, the main plate, which is me with a knife, and then you've got the lemon itself, which is obviously composited in, and then you've got the splashes as well, and they're composited in as well. So the first thing really there was really to come up with the concept, and then to create the look, and then to get my little helpers to put lemons onto skewers and and hold them in the right place and all that kind of jazz. And then, and then we had it was fun. It's actually it was kind of a family activity because we scooped out lots of lemons and we had a whole bowl full of slush and sludge. And then, it was, my daughter kept throwing it up in the air and I kept shooting it. And so we kind of created these splashes through that. So it was fun, but it is a composite. Obviously there's 3 different things that have been, well, really, if you count the background, then it's 4 different things that have been composited, and we can see it's really shot against a plain black background, and it's a 2-light setup. So you got the key light, and then the background vignette. That's another light, and the texture is just a sort of a texture that I've shot. It's a mixture of different scratches, and I think it was an icy window at one point or something, and I just basically put that over the black background, and that's essentially really it.
I was going to ask, so there's just one light on you as a subject?
Yes, correct. Yeah. It's just so I normally shoot this with a softbox, but in this instance, I wanted to try out a beauty dish with a diffusion sock, and so because my studio space is relatively small, and I figured if I can make this work with the beauty dish, that actually gives me a little bit more space in the space itself, and that surprisingly worked out really well. So that's really something I'm going to keep for the future. If I carry on making these kind of portraits in the future, then that's sort of I'm going to change that. But so yeah, it was we spent a day making this photo, and it was fun.
And did you have any issues getting the so the blade of the knife that's facing us is nicely lit? Was that by chance, by design? Did you specifically have to put a bit of white card there to get that?
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. Yeah. So basically, so initially, one of the problems that you have immediately, because you're taking up quite a lot of lateral space, and so the tip of the knife is relatively close to the lens of the camera. Because you're literally reaching out, and you've got to really reach out like this, because otherwise it never really looks right. And so you've got the length of your arm plus the length of the blade, and you want all of that to be in focus, more or less. So then your depth of field at that distance from the lens all of a sudden becomes massive. So that's hence, because I was trying f11, that really didn't work at all. And I'm thinking wow, how far do we have to go? And f18 kind of did it. And then the issue that you have then is that you obviously you got to compensate with your key light. So you got to really crank the key light up. And it actually got to the point where I had my key light cranked up to the max, and I then had to push the ISO on the camera up just to give me another stop to really kind of get that working. But the problem that you immediately have then is that the underside of your arm and the underside of the blade are not very well lit, because the light really comes from the top. And so you're going to have to reflect some light back onto the underside of the hand and the arm and the blade. And that's really, I found it looked the best with just some white poster board. Mm-hmm. And it was at a very slight angle, but it did the trick.
And what was the lemon, was it just let's slice a lemon, or could it have been a banana, an orange? Is there some personal significance or reason? Yeah, there is actually. I am a sucker for citrus fruit. I love citrus fruits. It's probably the only type of fruit I eat, and I really love oranges. And so originally I actually did a few test shoots with an orange, but it was just, there's something in the yellow of the lemon that really contrasted better. Although there were some issues with highlights that I had to fix in post as well, but generally speaking, the lemons really worked better for this particular shoot. We literally just went out and bought a whole truckload of lemons, and because I knew we needed a lot to make sludge, and so we just picked the one that looked the best. In fact, my daughter picked it. Yeah. I'll have to confer with Nick here. I don't know if having help from the family disqualifies, but Yeah, no. Okay. It was supposed to be a self-portrait. But I mean, when I saw it, the first thing that came to my mind, because of the situation that we're in and all the rest of it, I was like, oh, is this like When Life Gives You Lemons? Is that where you were going?
It's that does play into it. Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely it. There's a number of connotations. Is the fact that my mom always seems to think that you can cure anything with just lemon juice and honey or something like that. It's one of these. But really, ultimately, it was just a fun thing to do. I tell you what, the one thing that Nick mentioned earlier, and that was the issue with focusing when you're taking a self-portrait, because ultimately, really, what I'm doing is I have like a little remote control, and I remote control the shutter. And so the way this really works is my camera is set to a 2-second delay. So I hit the shutter on the remote, throw the remote away, grab the knife, strike some pose. It takes a photo. It comes through on my laptop, and I can get the feedback. And then it's all about really just looking at the shot and thinking, okay, the tip of the blade needs to be a little bit further to the left or further to the right, and I got to move my head this way, and you just build up to the final shot that way. And that probably took about, I don't know, maybe 30, maybe 40 shots, initially, and they're literally, the first 10 or 12 are really just testing out where my arm has to be in relation to the lens, or where my head has to be, and then after that, it's just goofy facial expressions. That's basically it.
I find that a real challenge. I guess it's like a body awareness thing. When I try to replicate it, I can never get it even close to what I originally did. So it is really difficult to the same again, but a little bit further to the left. But when I've worked with dancers, for example, they have that. But you like do exactly that again, but a little less tension in your left big toe, and they can do all of that. And I think that's where you are with that level of precision. Is that because you've practiced this kind of thing a lot? Do you have some kind of background in, I don't know, are you a juggler or a magician or something?
No. I think it's I think throughout this whole lockdown experience, I've done quite a lot of kind of selfies. Mainly, actually, really out of sheer boredom, and they've really always been. For the most part, they've been composites to an extent. And the other thing that I like doing usually is I like building sets. I like creating sets. I like putting things into places and fiddling around with that. And so I typically spend about I spend a couple of hours arranging things, and then I spend about 2 minutes actually shooting, because by the time I've got everything where I want it to be, it's really just a matter of getting in, posing, and I know exactly I know in advance how I want the pose to be. So this is really, for me, this is just a compositional thing where I just try out different things, and I know that, I want to have the blade pointing in a different direction from my head, and, all of these things come together. And then it's really just a matter of trying that, getting the feedback, trying it again, changing one thing. And the one thing I've learned from shooting headshots, actually, and also shooting models, is that I get people to shoot, and shooting bands, in fact, is I get people to change one thing, like one thing at a time. If you change your head position, don't change your arms. If you change your arm, don't change your head. Just change one thing at a time, and then we can just rattle through it, and it's a pretty quick process, because otherwise you lose everything. If somebody poses and you think, oh, it's almost there, but then if they change completely, you've lost all of that. So I'm trying to keep as many components of that pose as I can before I move into the next idea. And that's really so the actual shooting part of that, once I had the lights dialed in and once I had everything where I wanted it to be, the shooting part itself is pretty quick. I don't really spend a lot of time at that point than actually shooting. Once I get to the point where I'm ready to shoot, I've got all of that kind of worked out, more or less.
Yeah.
And then it's just and then, for instance, the position of the blade really matters, because when I shoot composites, one of the things I always try and do is I try and shoot additional objects that's supposed to appear in the shot. I try wherever possible, to shoot them in situ. So that I shoot them in the actual place or close to the place where they're actually supposed to be in the frame. So I know, or I work out where things are supposed to be before I get into the shooting part of it. So, take the lemons as an example. I knew the lemons were supposed to be in that top left of the frame. I knew the way the blade was going to come down, and I knew what the lemon would look like approximately. So when it came to actually shooting the lemon, I think we didn't really do that many takes on that. We had both lemon halves on skewers, and it was literally just like, okay, they're going to be approximately here. Take a shot. Does it look good? Can I see enough of the inside of the lemon or not? And you just adjust it a little bit. But it's pretty quick then. Yeah. I think the thing that took the longest to shoot were actually the splashes.
Okay. Was that difficulty of capturing them timing wise, or just getting a shape that was pleasing that you wanted to use? What was the challenge?
Well, it's really difficult to know how much force to use when you throw that up, because you throw it up. And so here's another thing that I always find when I shoot things similar to this is that when something is suspended in midair, there's movement in it because it moves somewhere. So, and things look different on the way up from the way they look on the way down. And so you gotta sort of think about which direction things would be flying if this was a real shot. And then you gotta make sure that you capture that as it describes that motion, if that makes sense. So if you hit the shutter button too late, then it may actually already be on the way down, and so and then of course since we're using a spoon or hands to throw the stuff up in the air, you really have to kind of work on the timing and just go, okay, how long do I have to wait until I hit the shutter button from the time that I've thrown this thing up in the air, and how much force do I need? How high does this stuff have to fly? And so took a little bit to kind of dial that in. But then I think once you got a feel for that, then it's pretty quick.
Good bit of physics.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, it's and a great deal of mess.
Yeah, and presumably you did this as all part of the homeschooling for your kids, right? You passed this off as an educational activity.
Yes, actually, and you're not wrong there, because my stepdaughter does. She's doing A-level photography.
Okay, perfect.
And so she is. I sort of wrapped that. I wrapped that up as part of her coursework.
and will she be using one of these images in her course?
I don't know, but she can claim that she was a part of it because she was. She was actually the one throwing the sludge up. So yeah,
that's what it means to be a photographer's assistant. You got dirty hands. Covered in food waste, and having absolutely to clean up afterwards. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, it's interesting for her because the kind of stuff that they do as part of the course is very different from the sort of stuff that I do at home. So I don't think they really, I don't think that type of photography is necessarily covered that much. So it's just from her perspective, I think it's interesting to just get a working perspective of that kind of thing. I mean, she's seen me do stuff all the time because my studio space is at home and. It's hard to miss. So at this point, if you've been listening to the audio version of this podcast, be reminded that there is more on YouTube. So if you go over to youtube.com/camera shake, you'll find a slightly extended version, because in the next bit of this episode, Ivan, Nick, and myself will be talking about the ins and outs of editing our shots. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, head over to YouTube. Remember, youtube.com/camera shake. Hit up episode 42, and you can get a first-hand experience of how we edit stuff like that.
So I'm going to walk you through the settings that I've got on the straight out of camera image. We can see from the histogram at the top here, it's a little bit underexposed. So I'm just going to give that a tiny bump, 1/6 of a stop, 0.17. I shot at 4800K, so a little bit on the cool side, which is what I tend to do. And then I'll warm it up in post later on, as you'll see. I just find that that's the way I get the colors that I like. I've got a small shift towards green here, 3 on the green, Again, no scientific reason for that. It's just that's what gives me the results that I like. The picture style that I'm using in other software, that's going to be called like camera profile or color profile or something of that nature. The one that I'm using is one that I've built myself. It's, as you can see from the name or infer from the name, it's loosely based on Kodak Portrait film. Again, not a scientific recreation, just something that I took inspiration from and I got to a look that I liked. So that's what I'm using there. I'm going to make a couple of adjustments here. Usually when I'm shooting, I've got the contrast boosted a little bit because I'm definitely going to add contrast in post-production. So I want to have, during the tethering, something that looks a bit like the final. But before we go to our raw conversion, I'm just going to drop that back to 0 so it's a bit flatter. It gives me more leeway to adjust the contrast more specifically where I want it later on. I'm also just going to give a little bit of a lift to the shadows, and I'm going to take down the highlights just a touch. Because I shot here using a hard light as the key light, the specular highlights are quite crisp, particularly just on the end of the nose here, some of the skin detail in the forehead and the cheek. So taking that down a little bit just gives me a bit more control. I do my sharpening at raw conversion stage. Conventional wisdom is that you should sharpen as the last step in your post-production workflow. I think that's based on the idea that you're going to do selective sharpening, and that's not something that I do. I find that these settings here give me the sharpness that I want throughout the image, and I very rarely do anything else with sharpening in the rest of my workflow, unless there's a very specific reason. I mean, it's also worth saying that this is based on using the camera body and lens and aperture that I am using. So the EOS R with the RF 50mm 1.2 shot at 1.2, there's not going to be a whole lot in the image that's particularly sharp anyway, shooting with such a wide aperture. So I don't really run into issues of things being too sharp. I'm just going to go back to this frame here, which just shot on my phone, a BTS image of the setup. Let's have a go at turning this into a finished article. First thing I like to do is just have a quick look around the frame and make a mental note of the things that I'm likely going to want to retouch, as in things that I'm going to want to remove. This bit of beard here that's catching the light, that's going to come off. That bit of beard at the back there, that's going to come off. Maybe I'll tidy up the edge a little bit here. There are a few bits of dust and things on the hat, which I will probably have a go at to get rid of those. Just tightens things up a bit. I'm quite stringent on the way I crop. I pretty much always go for a 4:5 ratio for this kind of portrait. I like that format. I'm gonna do my crop. I'm gonna commit to my crop quite early in the process. I'm gonna bring that down something like that. And I just want to nudge that in a little bit, maybe there, and perhaps just bring it up a touch there. I like to have quite a lot of headroom on my framing. I think it helps when the picture is viewed at a larger size. If it was intended to be used at a much smaller size, I'd probably crop in a bit closer, but I like to give the subject room to breathe, and it adds to the effect of this natural vignette that we've got going on if we see how far that falls off to black. So let's commit to that crop. One of the biggest challenges when you're retouching, obviously, is keeping your eyes fresh. Several ways you can do this. The most obvious one is, of course, just to take a break, go and look at something else, go and look at something that's a different distance from your eyes, look at something that's not a flat screen. that's got different colors on it, and then you can come back and be refreshed. But also just flipping the image round helps to make more apparent any distractions. I'm going to duplicate that layer, and I want to add a bit of crunch and detail separation to my shadows. So I'm going to do that by going into the tone mapping persona, and that's going to look awful to begin with. But then I'm going to blend that layer into my background layer. I'm going to go for something like, I don't know, let's look. I'm going to try 30%, and using the blend options, I'm going to make it only blend into the shadows. So I'm going to bring that down something like that. So I'm going to switch that off and then back on again. So you can see it just lifts the shadows a little bit and adds a little bit of grit into those shadow areas. I shot this slightly cool. I'm going to want to warm this up. That's without a doubt that I want to warm it up a little. Using the curves in RGB mode, so just underneath that, I'm going to get a levels command and just push some of those pixels a bit to the right to brighten it up. I'm thinking color-wise that I might want to treat the coat separately, because there's a fair bit of yellow in there, and I think I want to push that. Maybe, well, definitely not as far as the color that's in the hat, but maybe a little more towards brown, so that it makes for a more harmonious image. So in order to do that, I'm going to go back to my original layer. I'm going to get my selection brush tool, and we're going to make a selection. And then using that mask, I'm going to open an HSL layer. There we go. So we don't need the mask anymore. We can switch off the mask, the marching ants. I'm going to switch back on my other layers so that I can see what I'm doing. And it's basically the yellows that I want to affect. So I'm going to select the yellow. I'm going to get my picker, and it's the brighter yellows that I'm most worried about. So for now, it's looking a little too far on the red side for my liking. So I am going to back it off a little bit in the shadows. So in the shadows, it's affecting 50%. In the highlights, it's affecting 100%. If I switch that off and back on again, you can see what it's doing there. Okay, let's get in and start doing a bit of cleaning up. I'm going to switch off my color layers for now because we don't need those. I'm going to create a new layer, merging those two visible layers, and this now becomes my master layer, and this is the one that we're going to work on. So first things first, I'm going to go in and use the liquify tool. I don't need the mesh, and we're going to zoom in a fair bit here, and I'm going to use the push left tool and I'm just going to switch that off and on again. So it's a small detail, but I think it just tightens up that line and makes for a more pleasing image overall. So that's good. Now I'm going to add a new layer, empty layer, I'm going to get my in-painting brush, and I use this to take off bits of dust, bits of hair that are out of place, and all of those kind of things. Opacity 100, flow 100, hardness 97. I mean, it might as well be 100. And I'm going to set it to current layer and below. And we're going to begin cleaning up these small distractions. Next thing that I want to do is to work on some of the little uneven bits of skin. You can see it's a little dark there. There's some pores that are more visible than I would like. There's a bit of patchiness in color here and here. So in order to do those things, I like to use frequency separation. In order to use frequency separation, we need to have a merged layer. So I'm now going to merge visible. At this point, because of the way I work, I get lots and lots of full layers, which makes the file that I'm working on quite big. I'm quite happy to sacrifice some of my levels of undoability by going in and deleting those layers underneath. Now, in order to see what I'm doing here, it helps to have something more contrasty. So I'm just going to add this thing, the AF helper macro, which I downloaded from the Affinity forum. I can't remember the name of the helpful person that created it, but big thanks to them, whoever they are. And it's simply a way of boosting the contrast with particular attention to the reds and yellows, which make up all of our skin tones, so that we can see more clearly where there are issues in the skin tone. Now that's looking really quite clean. If I switch off that last layer that we just did, you can see that's somewhat more believable. The layer underneath, that's doing a nice job over there. Layers underneath that, a bit more grit. Yeah, I think that's just tightened it up enough for what I want. Let's deal with this highlight. Because we've got the frequency separated out on a large radius, it should be relatively easy to deal with this. I'm going to get myself a new layer. Again, with the healing brush tool, simply going to go in here, select a bit of non-highlight skin, boom, and drop it over the top. If we zoom out, that's probably reduced it a bit too much. That's looking like it's flattened out the tip of my nose. So I'm going to bring up the blend options. I don't care about the shadows here, it's just the highlights. So first things first, we'll drop that down like that. We only want to affect the highlights. And then with the opacity, I'm going to guess it's going to be something like 70%. That's probably still too much. It's attenuated a bit too much, because there should be a highlight there, right? It's the end of a nose. It's always going to catch a bit more light, but I just don't want it to be too much of a big blob. Looking at that in comparison to what we've got going on up here and around here, that feels about right for now. So I've got a curves layer set to screen and a curves layer set to multiply. So screen for dodge, multiply for burn, and then I'm going to get a brush, a white brush, so that we can brush in the effect. both of those curves layers are inverted. So we're going to brush them back in just where we want them. And I use for this a really soft brush, so 100% opacity, 1% flow, and 0 on the hardness. Again, I'm using the technique of really drawing in way more than I need, and then we will back it off a huge amount. So now what I'm going to do with those 2 layers, I'm going to select both of them. I'm going to bring up my blur, and I'm going to blur them at about, I don't know, 20. Let's go down like that. That's way too sharp. If I bring it up to 100, that's way too much blur, way too soft. Usually I find something like 30 is going to be good. So we can still see the effect, but it's not, doesn't feel like it's been brushed in. Although obviously the opacity is still at 100, so we will dial that back. I'm going to apply that blur. Then I'm going to take the burn layer and duplicate it. So we got an awful lot of burn going on there. And I'm going to blur that even more so that I've got some softer shadows. I'm going to go 75, 85, something like that. Yeah, that looks good. And then I'm going to get all 3 of those dodge and burn layers and take them down, let's say 15, and we'll see what it looks like. 15. If I switch them off and then back on again. So hopefully with those switched on, it doesn't feel like it's been retouched, but it does just create a bit more shape to the light, which gives us a bit more drama, a bit more interest, a bit more obvious direction for the viewer's eyes to come into the expression. I am going to go below those dodge and burn layers. I'm going to get another layer, empty, and I'm going to get my clone brush. And with this, I'm still going to stay with fairly soft, 100% opacity, 10% flow, and 0 hardness. I'm going to set current layer and below. Let's just save that so we don't lose it. And we're going to zoom in on those eyebrows. There's just a little bit here where it seems to have a little bit more skin showing through, and here where a little more skin is showing through, that I'm not keen on. This bit here where there's more skin showing through, that makes sense to me because the brow is, there's the tension in the brow. So the shape of it is popping out here, but it's these little kind of stripes that I'm not so keen on. So I'm just gonna zoom in like this and see if we can, hopefully subtly, just get a little bit there. That's more like it. Okay, coming back to color work, I think, because I've got all of the retouching done, I believe. Let's change the color of the coat back to the brown that we liked. We're going to put our levels in to flatten it out a little bit and give us room to then go like that with our curves. Let's bring up another levels layer and dial that in to where it's going to be something like that. In terms of brightness, that's pretty bright. I'm liking this. I think there's maybe too much richness in the coat still. A little to there, that's good. Let's bring up selective color. And in the reds, I'm just going to see what happens just adding a little more contrast into the reds of the skin tone, but possibly making it a bit too saturated. I'm not sure. We'll see. We'll make a decision. The yellows, let's do a similar thing. If I, ooh, yeah, that's having a bit more of an effect, but possibly feeling a little pink. So if I take some magenta out of the yellows, that's going to give me overall a lot more green. Let me go above my overall color grading layers and add color balance. I like the overall feel, but I'm just gonna push these sliders around a little bit and see what we get. We'll start with the shadows. Let's say we'll go with that. I'm going to switch it off and then switch it back on. That has given a little more depth to the image by introducing those sort of opposing color shifts. So I'm going to save that and I'm going to take a break. Okay, so we're back after having a bit of a break from the screen. Overall, I'm quite happy with what I've got here. I do want to make a few adjustments just to tighten things up a little bit more. I think I can add a bit more contrast overall to really highlight the face. Actual fact, what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to darken down the jacket a bit more, because that will, with the dark hat on top and the dark beard, I think that will help just to bring the focus into the face a bit more. That might be enough, we will see. So what I'm going to do is get my selection brush and I'm going to tell it all layers, and I'm going to go in and select. I'm going to get a curves layer. With the curves layer, I'm going to get the picker. I'm just going to select this shadow bit here, click on that and drag it down. Then I'm going to bring up another curves layer. I just want to make the highlight contrast on the skin a little gentler. So I'm going to get another curves layer. I'm going to set this to only affect the highlights, or rather to progressively only affect the highlights. And I'm going to change the blend mode to luminosity. And then I'm just going to get my midpoint here. Because I've done that, my overall black point and white point may have been affected. So I'm going to get another levels layer. And yeah, I've got a bit of a gap at the top. So I'm going to bring that in. Let me switch that off and back on again. That feels a bit nicer. I'm still tempted to go for maybe a little more richness. I'm going to try with another color balance. I think I'm going to add, as I often do, a bit of film grain. So I've got a layer of film grain that I like to use. I'll switch it to overlay mode. And I'm going to place it on here. Now, if I pull that in real close, we get very fine grain, which you can see best on the background here. If I pull that out further, like that, we get really coarser grain, much bigger grain. So it's a question of taste. I think that's too much. So I'm going to drag it in somewhere there. Looks good. Let's just bring it to full size. The grain's noticeable. Still maybe too much. So let's just nudge that in a bit more. That feels a bit more like it. We could go to there. That's good. So then with this layer, I'm gonna rasterize and trim so that it fits the layer. And let's go back to our original, our starting point, which was here. And that's what we've got. All good. I think the job's done.
Hey everyone, this is Nick, and we're going to take a look at how I achieved my selfie photo for this week's challenge with Ivan and Kersten. We're here in Lightroom at the moment. As you can see, there's some processing happening on the right-hand side, but that's not where I start for my edit. I actually start that in Photoshop. So we're going to head over there and check that out first. Okay, so here we are in Photoshop. And you can see my final edit here, at least the final edit that happened in Photoshop before I then made adjustments in Lightroom. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to turn this off. I've grouped all my edits together, which are in this folder here called Orig, as in original. And I'm going to turn that off, and we're actually going to go through the process of doing this start to finish. So it may look slightly different by the end of it, but you'll get the idea. So let's turn that off and see what we had to start with. So this is my raw image here. Just a quick little bit about the setup. It's a one light setup, this one speed light with a large, it's actually the aperture light dome that I'm using there. It's about 1 meter in diameter. You can see over up here on the top left-hand side. There is a reflector actually over to my left-hand side, so photo right, only doing a touch of fill. It's deliberately quite dark because I was going for this moody setup, as we discussed earlier on in the video. In hindsight, I wish I'd lit some of it a little bit better. There are a lot of learnings I take from this that I would do slightly differently next time. But this is what we achieved, and I like my final outcome. So let's get on. So first up, I'm going to duplicate the layer. It's Command J on a Mac or Control J on a PC. And that's just so I've got a permanent copy to go back to. So I've got something there. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to start healing the backdrop. So I'm going to try and get rid of some of these scratches that are, or rather folds and whatnot that are in the backdrop. I didn't steam it. I'm going to go through and get rid of the light dome, some of the other bits and pieces down here, even though my final crop doesn't have that, but I like to get rid of it anyway because I can't be sure necessarily that what my crop's going to be at the end. So I like to get rid of it anyway. And we'll get rid of some of this stuff at the top. So I'm going to show you what I would typically do on one piece, and then we'll speed through. So I'm going to grab the healing brush and make it a larger size. And because we're on a new layer, an empty layer, you want to make sure that you've got current and below selected, not just current. If you've just got current, nothing's going to happen. So we're going to zoom in. I generally like to go slightly methodical. So I'll do one bit before another. So it's slightly larger. Go down, heal that, go across there. And I'm going to change the size of my brush depending on what it is I'm healing. Okay, I think for the purposes of the backdrop, that's all I'm going to do for now. So I used a healing brush, and then I used the clone stamp tool at the top just to make that all consistent. I'm not going to go through and get rid of all that up there at the minute, because I know I'm not going to use it. You'll notice that I haven't been too precise on the healing, because I know it doesn't need it in this particular photo. And the reason it doesn't is because it has that kind of pattern to it anyway, and I know I'm going to be adding some textures after too, which will all add to the effect of it. So that's as far as I'm going to take the backdrop. On another layer, I'm going to go through and heal kind of dust and little bits of fluff and lint and so forth that might be on my jacket and clothes there. Okay, so that's all I'm going to do for that right now. So I'm going to start labeling these. Don't forget to do that. I'm going to call that BD Heal, like backdrop heal. I'm going to call this Gen Heal, as in general heal. And now I'm going to take a look at my face and do that on a separate layer as well. So we'll call this Face Heal. So one thing to note, which I'm sure the other guys will mention as well, is that you don't want to go overboard on the face. You need it to look natural. You only want to take out and heal things that aren't ordinarily there, you know, little blemishes, spots, dry skin, for example, you know, stray hairs, things like that. You don't want to go any further than that, really. Personally, I just think it starts to look a bit too unnatural. So that's all I'm going to be doing on my face. And it's very difficult to take the vanity out and go, oh, if I could just lift that eyebrow. No, don't do it. Try and resist. Okay, so again, that's probably all I'm going to do there. So let's take a little look at what we had and see where we're at now. That's before, and that's with the healing going on. So small but important changes. So one thing I noticed as going through that edit, and I noticed the when I originally edited this as well, was that there's a bit of brightness on my nose here that is brighter than the rest of the other brightest parts of my face, and I just want to reduce that slightly. Now, there are plenty of ways you can go about doing this, but one way I like to do it is to add a curves layer, use the hand tool to then select that part, that bright part, which you can see when I select that, it puts a point over here. Now, when I bring that down, it's actually going to adjust the entire image. So we're going to use the mask here to selectively put this in over the nose. But we're going to adjust it first, then change the mask and paint it back in. So let's bring that down. I'm just looking at that point in the nose, probably somewhere like there. Now remember, this will change the whole image. Yeah, I'll probably do it. We can always adjust it again later. So I'm now going to use Command I, which will invert the mask. So it's all black now, which means nothing is showing from that layer. Now we're going to take our brush tool and we're going to make sure we're set to white. I've got a flow at about 3% and hardness down at around 10. And I'm literally just going to use white to paint in this effect. So we're painting in the lower brightness level on the nose. So let's go over that couple of times there, and let's see what we've done. So that's up before and that's after. It's just brought it down a touch, maybe add just a little more down at the bottom there. Before, after, and I may just now we've got it painted in. I'm now going to adjust that curve to see if we can get it feeling natural. So if we go too far, looks ridiculous, and if we go the other way, it's way too bright. Just bring it down, maybe somewhere around there. Before, after, before, after. Let's zoom out slightly. Before, after. Yeah, just takes an edge off that. Okay, so next up, I'm going to take a look at the eyes, and I'm going to brighten those up. So I'm going to add another curves layer. I'm going to set this to screen, which makes everything bright. Then I'm going to invert the mask again. And now I'm just going to go into my eyes. Again, my flow is down at 3%. I've got a soft brush. And I'm just going to go around one swipe of the eyes. Now, we'll look at the whole side of this face a little later and just brighten those up. I'm then going to increase my brush size. I'm just going to do a sweep under the eye as well. Get rid of those tired bags that I've got there. Zoom out a touch. And we're going to see before and after. Before and after. So I actually think that under my right eye, I've gone too far. So I'm just going to change my brush back to black, but I thought the rest was okay. And I'm just going to put that back as it was, so to speak. I'm going to put my brush back to white and do one sweep this time. Zoom out, before, after. Zoom out a little further. Okay, I think that's probably all right for those tired eyes. Now we're going to look at a bit of selective sharpening, and I'm going to do that by doing a stamp layer, which basically creates a layer of everything else that you've done before. Simple as that, that's all it is. And then I'm going to go to Filter, Other, and High Pass. And I'm going to have that set to, yeah, probably about 2.1. I'm going to leave that there. I'm going to hit OK. And now I'm going to set this to soft light. So as you can see, before and after, now it's all massively sharpened. All right. Horrible. Nasty. But we don't want all of that there. So we're going to leave it on. We're going to add ourselves a mask. And we're going to invert that mask. So now we've got nothing going on. And now we're going to paint in where we want the sharpness to happen. Often go to, you know, the eyes and the eyebrows, the mouth as well. And I often go around any facial hair that someone has too. Okay. And actually on my hair, I will actually often do a little bit on that too. Okay. All right, so I've painted in some of that with a low flow, and let's have a little look at what we've got there. So we've got before and after, before and after. Just bringing a little focus to those features. Okay, so now we're going to do some frequency separation on my skin. And I'm not going to go into detail about that. Plenty of videos out there how to do it. Just know that that's the process that I'm going for. And what I will say is that I do create a stamp layer, which is everything below, and then I duplicate that layer as well to do the two separate levels that we do. So we've got blur and texture then at that point. Okay, so enjoy. So that's probably about all I'm going to do there. I don't take it too far. I don't particularly like the look of it often. So just enough to smooth out some of those colors and textures there. So next up, I did a quick bit of adjustment on the jacket. So there was just one piece of the jacket here, just this little bulge. I didn't like the crease on. So I just went in and grabbed the liquify tool. Nothing outrageous. As long as it looks natural and not bulging out quite so much, I'm happy. I don't like taking things like that too far. All right, so there's 2 more primary things that I did, and that was I did quite a major adjustment on the shade because it was just out of balance. And when I mean out of balance is, well, you know what lampshades are like. They just slightly on the wonk a little bit. So I adjusted that, and then I added some textures. For the sake of time, I'm just going to jump ahead to the lampshade having been done, but that was simply done by using object select like this, refining that object select, and I cut it out and simply just stretched and skewed it and put it back on top. Simple as that. So I'm just going to skip ahead to that now. Okay, so lampshade is done. For brevity, I've just copied over what I did from my original one to save me having to redo that, which is why you're actually seeing a little bit of texture over it right now. So just ignore that for a minute. So lampshade finished. So the final thing that I did in Photoshop is add a couple of textures. So I've got this texture and I've got this texture. And all I'm going to do is just move those around, and then we're going to look at the opacity of those, and we're going to look at dropping some of it in and out. So I'm going to move them around first. Somewhere about there. And let's add the second one. And I'll take the first one off. And I think somewhere around there will do for that one. Okay, so we're going to take texture 1. I'm going to turn that on. And we're going to add a mask to it. And we're going to now paint out where we don't want this texture. Okay, I'm going to use that with the brush tool. I'm going to set our brush to black. And I'm going to put my flow probably up from where we've had it, maybe somewhere around 40 or so, and might put our opacity down a little bit as well. Okay, so we'll start with that. So let's zoom in, and so first with this, I'm going to take things out where I want it partially off. So basically everywhere other than the body and face. Okay, you don't have to be too precise. Okay, something like that. Before I come back to taking the texture off me completely and the lampshade here, I'm going to do the same so I don't have to adjust my opacity and flow settings. I'm going to do exactly the same on texture 2. Okay, something like that. Now, because we've still got texture 2 selected, I'm going to bring up my flow, I'm going to bring up my opacity, and I'm going to take it completely off what I want it off. Now, the reason I'm removing it from the lampshade completely in this instance is because of where I copied it from the original that had texture on it already, but just know that I did exactly the same as what we just done there, around 40%. Okay, that's great, and we'll do the same thing on texture 1. All right, so something like that. So now we're just going to adjust the opacity of both of these textures to see where we want them to sit overall in the image. So let's play with texture 1 first. This is without completely. And let's just increase that. Yeah, I'm actually going to leave that up at 100%, I think. It's this one that's probably going to be the one that needs to come down. So 85. So I want this to look gritty. Something like that. That's what I was going for. So it almost looks like a red wall behind you. Okay, so last thing to mention is that these were set to overlay. All right, so that's all I did in Photoshop. Depending on the situation and frankly how I'm feeling on the day, I may do dodging and burning within Photoshop, but on this instance I didn't, so I'll show you that in Lightroom. So let's head over there now. All right, so here we are in Lightroom. This is the final image again. So rather than go through this and adjust it as we go, I'm just going to show you what I did. First of all, let's have a little look at the crop. Here we go. So this is the crop that I had, 8x10. Generally what I do portrait crops in. And as you can see, I've tried to balance the how much space we've got on either side here versus keeping my eye line roughly on the third. It doesn't have to be strictly that, but that's generally where I like it. And I really, as we discussed before, wanted a lot of space above the head to draw you down into the photo. So that's what we did with the crop. We've got some gradient filters going on as well, with the exposure dropped down a couple of stops, and this is on all sides. So let's see what it is without those, and then with. Feels like a more finished product in this particular setting. So before and after. We've got some radial filters happening as well. Most of them are just to add accents to the areas that were too dark. Down here on the plant as well, a little bit extra there. All the way across my left-hand side. Brought up the exposure of this side of my face and my face in general. And then I've turned the light on, which wasn't on previously because it wasn't being picked up in the way that I wanted to be picked up. Okay. So the radial filters, each one will have a varying level of exposure on it. But this is before, and this is adding them. Before, after, makes a huge difference. So these were added after general balancing that was being done. And then we've got some brushes as well happening. So we've got one here, which is just bringing up the left-hand side of my face a stop. We've got one here, which has just added a little bit more to my face in general. And then we've got some dodging and burning being painted in various places across my hair, jacket, face, and so forth. And that's just, look at that, 0.13 of a stop and minus 0.4. Okay, so not a lot going on there really, but does make a big difference. Let's turn all of those off and back on. All right, so there are brushes as well. So let's move on down to what we had going on. So I brought up the overall exposure and the contrast quite a lot. Without that contrast, that's kind of how it looked. Putting that back in adds a lot more of what we want there, particularly in this style photo. Brought down the highlights, the shadows came down, and the whites and the blacks. This was the balancing act that we did, and then the overall exposure came up. I dropped the clarity ever so slightly overall. I do like clarity, but I think it ruins a lot of photos at times just because it gets added as a matter of course and not for what the photo needs. And I didn't think it needed it. In fact, I clearly thought it had too much, but I want to put it in where I want it, like the selective sharpening, for example. Tone curve, very little going on here. It looks like I dropped the reds ever so slightly in the midtones. Greens, I suspect I raised them in the shadows ever so slightly, but it looks like I may have brought that back down. Oh no, ever so slightly. And the blues, it looks like I raised those as well. So let's turn all of those on and off. Yeah, particularly the reds and bringing those blues in, you can see that makes it's tiny changes, but for me that makes a huge difference to the overall image. Okay, so we've got the curves. HSL, there's a lot going on here. So hues, messed around all of those. Some of these are actually probably a layover from a preset of mine. So some of them maybe adjusting things that weren't in the image and didn't need adjusting. So I just didn't change them back. So we've moved the reds a little further to the orange. The oranges have stayed where they are. Yellows down to that area as well. Greens down that way too. And some minor changes in the blues and the magenta. All the saturation has been brought down across the board, as has the luminance in general, other than the aqua channel there, which, we haven't got much going on other than the lampshade, which is why that would have come up. So let's turn all of those off. Wow. You see why saturation needed to come down now? Incredible. Bit of color grading going on. I think we've got nothing going on in midtones or shadows. Just brought the highlights down into the blue area ever so slightly. So see before and after on that. Subtle, but I can see a change in my face in particular and on that lampshade as well. Looks like we've got a smidge of noise reduction, smidge of sharpening happening, and all the sharpening has been masked as well to just those areas. So not a lot. Effects, I've added some grain. I've left the rest at the default. So just adding a little bit there. Don't think there's a photo I don't add a little bit of grain into, unless the ISO is too high to begin with, but that's rare. So I always add a little bit of grain, just gives it a nice cohesive look. And then I did adjust the calibration on the green channel here, just a touch. I moved the color of the greens and the saturation of the greens. You can see it actually brings up the whole image a touch, but not a lot. Adds a little bit of sparkle to it. Very, very subtle stuff. And there we go. That's all I did to this image. Hope you enjoyed it.
Hi, this is Kersten, and we're going to talk about how I shot my entry for the Ivan Weiss Selfie Challenge. This photograph is a composite. It really consists of 3 different elements. It's what I call the background plate, which is essentially me with a knife. Then I had to shoot the lemon and the splashes separately. So I'm going to talk you through my workflow. I'm going to start in Lightroom for some basic adjustments. Then we're going to head over to Adobe Photoshop for some compositing, and then we're going to go back to Lightroom just to put some final magic onto the photo and to make it look like it looks right here. So here we are in Lightroom, and the first thing I'm going to show you is what that photo looked like straight out of camera. As you can see, I shoot the whole thing wider because I know I'm going to crop this back to a square. And I want to leave a little bit of space there so I can have more flexibility with the cropping. Originally, I started shooting this style of portrait for a photo series on Instagram called 3 Heads in a Row. If you want to head over to Instagram, just search for @3headsinArow. Let me know what you think. Give us a like and so on and so forth. That'd be super awesome. But for now, let's get into this photo. So it's shot wide. You can see the background. You can see the light stands, the background stands. You can see all that stuff that shouldn't be in a photo. That's cool. We're going to get rid of that in a minute. So here's a look behind the scenes. You can see my black pop-up backdrop. I use a background light as well and the key light. So it's a simple 2-light setup. And in order to get some light on the underside of the blade and the hands and the arms, I use this foam board. Here's just white foam board, just acts as a reflector and just pushes some light back into the image. Now, what I feel is very important, at least for me, is that I have immediate feedback when I take a self-portrait. And that's why I shoot tethered into a laptop. So every time I hit the button on the remote, takes a picture, I can get some immediate feedback and I'd know whether, I need to move my head position or whether I need to move the blade to a different angle or anything like that. It just makes life a lot easier. Now, the other thing you need for something like this is coffee, loads of coffee. Nothing works here without coffee. Now, the other thing I had to shoot was the lemon itself. And as you can see, the lemon here is on skewers. We're going to get rid of that in Photoshop in a minute. But what's really important for composites like this is whenever you're photographing different components that will make it into the final image, I always try and photograph those approximately in the space where they will be later on in the photo. I can make sure that the highlights and the whole lighting and the shadows and everything are where they would be had the lemon been there in the first place. And finally, to complete the whole thing, I had to shoot some splashes. And what I did was I just emptied out a number of lemons and created a bit of slush. And then you can see my daughter's hand here. We're just throwing some slush up in the air. We took a whole bunch of different photos. And the end result is really just a combination of a number of these splashes. If you look at the final here, you can see we've got lots of different splashes. There's bits of lemon juice in the air. And what I did there is I just composited together, almost like a splash plate, if you want to call it that. And that's what I then composited into the final image. But we'll deal with that when we're back in Photoshop. To start with, we're going to have a look at our background plate. So the first thing I would do here is our crop. Now just simply set this to a 1:1 crop, so just a square crop. And just by cropping it, you can see I can already get rid of a lot of the background noise. So a lot of the light stands and all of the stuff that's annoying in the background, I can get rid of that. Now there's still a few bits left, like we've got the corners here. We're going to deal with all of that in Photoshop in a minute. But for now, that's pretty much where we need to be. So I'm happy with that. So the next thing is I'm just going to do a few adjustments here, some contrast and deal with the highlights and the shadows. And we're going to add some texture, and we're just going to adjust the color a little bit to just give it a little bit more pop and just crunch it up a little bit. I like to shoot things a little bit warmer. A little bit of texture, so we're going to put that to about plus 12. Looks good. And dehaze, we're going to crank that up as well. I'm just going to put that to about here. Now, as soon as you add some presence and some contrast into the image, you'll notice that it also affects your colors. And I just want to make sure that that doesn't go too far beyond where I want it to be. So I'm actually, weirdly, I'm going to crank up the vibrance quite a bit. I'm just going to give that quite a bit of a boost. Now, vibrance mainly affects the skin tones, so I'm going to counteract that a little bit with saturation. And we're going to come back to the skin tones in a minute, but just going to take that back a little bit. And that's cool for now. We're not quite done yet. We're just going to have a look at the tone curve as well. So we're just going to use the tone curve. I'm going to push the shadows up a little bit. And I'm going to bring the midtones back. And then I'm going to take a highlights. I'm going to bring that down just a touch to about here. Okay, cool. And if we compare the before and after, so that's the before and that's the after, you can see that's really made the denim of the shirt come out a lot more. It's made the hat come out. The fur looks a lot better now. It's had a little bit of an impact on the skin itself and the skin texture. We're going to deal with that in Photoshop. We're going to give this a bit of a cleanup. And also, it's just a few parts of the image that are now a little too bright, like my hands, but we're gonna bring that down later on. So I think for now, we're pretty much there. There's maybe only one thing I'm gonna change in the colors. I'm just gonna push the oranges up just a little bit to about here, just to bring a little bit more orange back into the skin. And that's pretty much where I leave it in Lightroom. Now I'm going to bring that over to Photoshop and we'll continue there. And here we're in Photoshop, and to start with, I'm just going to go through a few things that I think we need to take care of in here. So to start with, if we look at the background, there are a few holes that we need to fill. So there's this bit here, and we just really need to get rid of all of that stuff. So we're going to fix the background there. There's also a bunch of things down here, for example, that needs fixing. There's some stains and a few little holes in the table that I want to get rid of, and some bits to fill in here. So all of that needs fixing. And then, of course, we need to really look at the skin, because that's something we need to clean up. Also, I like to have a look at the eyes, so we're going to whiten that, and we're going to deal with the teeth, and there's a little highlight there as well. And then, of course, we're going to do some dodging and burning, just to bring the shadows out and the highlights, just to make that denim a little bit more contrasty. There's a whole lot of stuff here. And that's pretty much it for the background plate. Of course, we're going to composite in the lemon, and we're going to composite in our splashes. And then finally, we're going to apply some background texture onto the background as well. And that should basically do it. Now, I've prepared a number of things already. I'm just going to get rid of this. I've prepared a number of things. I've actually already done the splashes, composited them together, and I've prepared the texture as well. We're going to look at that later. And I've also cut out the lemon. And when we get to that in a bit, I'm going to explain what I've done. I'm not going to take you through the whole process because that would take hours. So if you want to learn how to cut out an object, I'm sure there's going to be some great tutorials on Photoshop already. Have a look at Flearn.com. You can learn a lot there. But for now, we're going to get started with the background layer. So the first thing I will do is actually just select the background layer, and I'm going to copy that. It's always a good idea to work from the copy, because that way, if something goes wrong, you can always come back to the original background layer. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start by fixing these background issues here. So I'm going to choose the lasso tool. I'm going to set the feathering to 0. And I'm going to actually let Photoshop do the heavy lifting here. So I'm just going to bring up the content aware fill menu. So that's Shift and Backspace. And as you can see, it's done a pretty good job at filling that in. So I'm going to fast forward to the next bit, because you don't necessarily need to watch me do all this in real time. So I'm going to come back once I've filled all these bits in. Okay, so that's done a reasonably good job. The background's looking good, everything's filled in. And I think for now, that'll do the trick. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to clean up a couple of more things. So the table here needs a little bit of cleaning up. I'm going to use the exact same method that I used before. So we're going to use the lasso tool, and we're just going to use the fill menu. Again, that should actually do a reasonably good job. You can always spend more time and be a little bit more precise, but for our intents and purposes, I'm going to show you the process itself, so you can apply that to your own imagery as and when you need it. So we're going to move on to some skin fixing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go in, and I'm just going to use the spot healing brush, and I'm going to fix a few skin issues to start with. And also I'm going to go and have a look at the blade, and there's a few little stains in there that I'm just going to fix in the same way. Okay, and that's the first part of our skin repair done. Now the next technique I'm going to use is some frequency separation. I've already created an action for that. Now, again, I'm not going to take you through the whole technique, but if you want to learn more about how to use this technique, frequency separation, have a look at Flearn. There's some excellent tutorials there as well. So again, I'm going to fast forward, and I'm going to come back once I'm finished with the skin bit. And we're back. Now what the frequency separation has done is it's just smoothed out the skin a little bit. If you look at the before and after, you can see It's not too dramatic. It doesn't make me look like I'm some kind of mannequin or anything like that. It's just smooth the whole thing over a little bit. And I'm quite happy with that for now. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in and fix some of these bags under my eyes. Must have been tired that day. And then I'm going to go on to the eyes, and I'm going to do a little bit of teeth whitening as well. So again, I'm going to fast forward for that, and we'll be back in a sec. Now that looks a lot better. I'm going to go on to whitening the eyes and the teeth a little bit as well. Now, if we compare this to where we started, you can see what we've done is not very dramatic. Just taken some of the shadows away from the areas under the eyes, smoothened the skin a little bit, and we've just very, very gradually increased this whiteness in the eyes and the teeth. And it just makes a little bit of a difference, which is what we want. So we're pretty much done with the background plate now, and it's about time to bring in the lemon and the splash. So I've prepared the lemon beforehand, and all I've done is, I'm going to show you this by just singing this out for a second. So that's our lemon. All I've done is I've really just moved it into place, and then I've created a mask. So if I disable the layer mask for a second, you can see that was the original image. I fixed the skewers. You can see that there's also the original skewers, and I've just retouched them out. I don't need any more than that because of the way I'm going to blend this in. So I've simply masked out the lemon itself. And if I turn the mask on again, you can see what's happened here. Boom. So that really just leaves me with the lemon itself. If I put this back in context, you can see it's in the right position already. Now, remember when we initially looked at the original shots in Lightroom, I said it's a good idea to shoot the lemon approximately where it'll be in the final photo. And you can see it pretty much matches exactly where the blade is. So that's good. Now we also have a bunch of splashes. What I've done is I've composited these splashes together out of a number of different shots. So the principle is exactly the same as with the lemon. We've created masks of individual splashes. We put them together, and then I just simply grouped them together in the splash group so I can turn them on and off at will. Of course, I could move them around, but I've already put them in the right place. So that's all good to go. So that is our lemon and our splashes composited in. Now, the next thing we got to do is to apply our background texture. And I've created this texture out of two layers. I call it the scratch and the grunge layers. So you can see the first layer here is just a layer of scratches. I think that was photographed on some old piece of plexiglass, plasticky type of a thing. So that's that. And the other layer is a grunge layer. And I think this was the top of maybe it was a tile or a concrete slab or something like that. And when you put the two together and you blend them together, you get this really cool, grungy, scratchy layer. And that's what I use on the black background there. But if you look closer, you can see that that texture now, as an overlay, it goes over everything. It's over part of the table, it's over my face, my body, and over the lemon and the knife and everything else. And of course, we want to get rid of that. So I've created a layer mask on the texture group itself. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to the brush tool. I'm just going to use my brush tool, and I'm going to paint black on the bits that I don't want to be covered by the texture. So you can see as soon as I paint black on there, the texture disappears. I'm going to do this for my face and for my body, the knife blade and the lemon and everything else, and bits of the table. Because it's kind of boring, I'm just going to fast forward from here. Okay, and we're back. So as you can see, the texture is now covering the background, and it's not covering me or the lemon or the knife. Now, finally, the last thing I want to do is some dodging and burning, just because I want to get a little bit more contrast into that shirt and into the hat. And I'm just going to contour my face out a little bit more. And once we've done that, we're going to be finished here in Photoshop. We're going to hop back into Lightroom to just finish it off. So for our dodging and burning, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create another applied image layer. So what that does is it just copies all the layers from before onto one layer. So now I can just work on that, and that's good for me. So to dodge and burn, I've already created a little action here, and what that does is creates 2 curve layers. This is our burn layer, and that's our dodge layer. And all I've done is I've simply pushed up the midtones for the dodge, and I've pulled them down for the burn layer. So the burn layer is going to intensify the shadows, and the dodge layer is just going to intensify the highlights. And because they're masked out with a black mask, I'm going to switch my color to white, and I'm going to use the brush tool. And now I'm going to start with the burn layer. So I'm going to start by painting over all the bits that are in shadow already. Oops. And as you can see, that went wrong because I forgot to change the opacity. So I'm going to bring the opacity down to about sort of 30 something %. And I'm going to do the same thing with the flow, although I'm going to bring this down to, say, about 10%. Now, what that does is it basically means that I can much more gradually apply my dodging. So wherever I see shadow, I'm just going to paint over that, and I'm just going to intensify the darker bits in this photo. And you can see there's some dark bits here. I'm just going to stick to the hat for a minute. And I also want to give it a little bit of contours. I'm just going to darken up this part of the hat a little bit. Now I'm going to continue with that on my face and on the hat, and especially on the denim shirt, and on the knife and the lemon. And again, I'm going to fast forward because, you know, there are probably more interesting things to watch. Okay, and that's our burn layer done. Again, if I turn this on and off, you can see it's made a little bit of a difference. And now we're going to complete the dodging and burning with the dodging part. So now we're going to hit the dodge layer, and we're going to go onto the layer mask. And we're going to pretty much do the same thing, except now we're going to focus on the highlights. So now I'm just going to make the highlights a little bit more intense. So I'm just going to brush over the brighter parts of the image. And what we're doing there is we're just creating more contrast between the darker bits and the brighter bits. And that should look cool. And again, I'm going to fast forward this because, as I said earlier, there's probably more interesting stuff on Netflix. And there we are. So now I'm just going to group the dodge and the burn layer. And then if I turn this on and off, you can see the difference that dodging and burning has made. So you can see there's a lot more contouring in the face. There's a lot more contouring and contrast in the denim shirt. And it's made a little difference to the blade as well. So the whole thing actually just pops out a little bit more. And that's a good thing. Okay, but now that is it in Photoshop. And I'm just going to save this. And we're going to be back in Lightroom to give them finishing touches. And I'll see you there in a second. And we're back in Lightroom, and we're just going to spend a couple of more minutes putting on some finishing touches. So to start with, I'm just going to have a look at the overall exposure. I'm actually going to crank that up by about 1/4 of a stop. So that's 0.25. And we're going to have to deal with some of the highlights in here now. We're going to bring that down, especially around here, around the hands. We're just going to bring that down again in a second. But let's have a look at what else we need to do in here. So what I like to do at this point is I like to enable profile correction. Does it make any difference at this point? Yeah, a little bit. That looks good. So we're going to do that. We're also going to put a little bit of a vignette on. So let's have a look. Okay, so I'm going to put that down to about -57. That looks good. We really want all the focus to go towards the center of the image. So that's really the brightest parts, which at this point is my hands and the face. So we're going to even that out a little bit in a second. And I'm also going to bring the table back up because I do want that to be just a little bit brighter. So I'm going to show you how to do that using some graduated filters in just a minute. But I'm going to look at some sharpening there as well. I would say probably around about here. And I'm also going to just mask that out. That actually looks pretty good to me. Okay, we'll have a look at the eyes first, because we've whitened the eyes a minute ago in Photoshop, but I like to just bring the iris out a little bit as well. And we're going to do that with one of these circular filters. So we're going to click on circular filter, and we're going to just use the iris enhance preset. I'm just going to draw that around the iris. I'm just going to size that so that's about right. And then in here, we're going to look at some of our settings. So the exposure, I'm going to crank that up a little bit more, maybe to about here, 0.48. That should do it. Contrast, we're going to beef that up quite a bit to about 25. Now, I like to bring the highlights in that as well, so I'm going to crank them up to run about here, so about 22. That looks good. What else? Some saturation. That's actually good. And we also want to give it some sharpness. So I'm going to bring the sharpness to about 40. And I'm going to bring the blacks back a little bit to about 17, I think, or minus 17 even. Yeah, that should do it. So we'll just look at the before and the after. You can see how that's really brightened up the iris there quite a bit. Now, if you right click on the circle, click duplicate, you get basically an exact duplicate of what you've just done. And then you can just move that circular filter over the other iris, size it up approximately correctly, maybe turn it a little bit. There you go. And that gives you a little bit of an eye enhancement. And again, that's the before, that's the after. Just puts a little bit of a happy light into the eyes. Now, let's have a look at the hand issue. So I kind of feel that my hands are a little bit too bright in comparison to my face. And what that means is I need to darken my hands down a little bit, and I need to bring the overall exposure of my face up just a touch so we can kind of address that balance. We'll create a new circular filter, and we're just gonna make, actually, switch this to darken. So don't have to be super accurate with that. Now I've got exposure down minus 30 at the moment. I would say we'll bring that down just a touch more, maybe 0.4 or something. That's it. And then we're also going to kill some of the highlights. We're going to bring that down quite a bit, maybe to minus sort of 45. Yeah, that's better. So again, if we look at the before and the after, you can see that that's really taking the exposure on the hands down quite a bit. So what we'll do is we'll create yet another circular filter. I'm going to put that over my face. Boom. And now here we're going to do the exact opposite. We're just going to brighten that face up just a little bit. So here I would say that's sort of, yeah, about plus 30, something like that. And again, I'm just going to kill the highlights a little bit. Similar sort of thing. I'm just going to bring that down to around here. And again, if we look at the before and the after, then we can see that the overall balance has shifted a little bit in favor of the face. So that's almost done, but we still have to address this table down here. Now, we created a vignette a minute ago, and it's just taking the table down a little too much. So we're going to go to the graduated filter here, and we are going to create a bit of a graduation here. And we're just going to bring that up a little bit, I think, to about, maybe about here. There you go. You can see that's just brighten that table up just a touch. And because it's wood, I'd like to increase the texture a touch as well. Just to focus in on that grain a little bit more. There you go. And that's it. That's the final image. I hope you like it. I hope you enjoyed this little bit of a tutorial. And of course, if you're watching on YouTube, then hit subscribe, give us a bit of a like and a follow. And if you are interested in listening to the audio version of this podcast, then you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Spotify, Overcast, and all the other good podcast platforms. So hit us up on there. And as always, we'll see you again next Thursday. So that's it. That was Camera Shake Podcast episode 42 with Ivan Weiss once again. Thank you so much for coming on the show again, Ivan. It was an absolute education, and I hope things are panning out over the next few months so that we can actually hook up in person, because we're really not that far away from each other, because you're just down the road, really.
Indeed, that'd be great. Love to welcome you in the studio with or without lemons and knives. Or pot plants.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that'd be fantastic. So without further ado, we've come to the end of Camera Shake episode 42. Of course, if you are watching this on YouTube, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the bell and all the whistles and all that kind of stuff. And that'd be fantastic. Alternatively, if you live in Israel and you're watching this podcast, please get in touch, because in the analytics of our show, we can see where people are when they listen to the show, and we've noticed that we have some listeners in Israel. It'd be super awesome to know who you are and what you do, and whether or not you enjoy the show. Well, I mean, why would you be listening if you didn't? Clearly, duh. So we see you again. We'll be back next week with episode 43. As always, have a good week. We'll see you next Thursday.